The final panel theme is a critique of academic knowledge and new spaces for knowledge creation. The panelists are Kayla Watkins, to my immediate right, Arkishman Raju, Divya Nair, and Brandon Stanford on the end. And before they get started, I just want to quote a couple of quotes from W.E.B. Du Bois and James Baldwin, the anchors and the rock of the Saturday Free School. Let me start with one by W.E.B. Du Bois from Dust of Dawn. And I quote, "There is but one coward on earth, and that is the coward that dare not know." The second one from W.E.B. Du Bois, "The function of the university is not simply to teach breadwinning or to furnish teachers for the public schools or to be a center of polite society. It is, above all, to be the organ of that fine adjustment between real life and the growing knowledge of life, and an adjustment which forms the secret of civilization." From James Baldwin, "It is certain in any case that ignorance, allied with power, is the most ferocious enemy justice can have." And the last one by James Baldwin, "Education is indoctrination if you're white, subjugation if you're black." The first panelist, Kayla Watkins.
Hi, everyone. When Nandita asked me to speak at this panel, I was a little confused because I saw everyone else that was going to be speaking on the panel, and I was like, these people are way smarter than me. That initial response, I think, it says everything you need to know about what academic institutions can do to your psyche than anything else that I can think of. I've been in school since I was 3. I talk a lot. I know my own experience. I pay attention in school and things like that. And even with all of that foundation, I still doubted my own knowledge of myself. I still doubted my own knowledge of my experience. So I want to break down why I think that academic spaces, they should be a place to foster knowledge. They should be a place to encourage knowledge and encourage seeking knowledge. But instead, the way that they are today, they're the antithesis to all of that. For full disclosure, I just finished my degree at Temple University in December, and I will be going back to Temple for my master's in the fall. So everything that I talk to you about is as much of a critique of academia as a critique of myself, and also a reminder to myself that if I'm not careful, my ideological clarity that I've been trying to develop can be lost if I'm not careful of keeping those institutions from clouding my judgment, clouding what I actually know to be true. I honestly think that academia suppresses the evolution of knowledge, specifically revolutionary thought, in 2 ways. The first is through complacency. The university creates an army of students who are complacent not only in the way that the school is run, not only in the way that the school impacts the community around them, not only in the way that the school just impacts their life, but also it makes students complacent about the way that the world is. Mind you, this isn't because students are intrinsically apathetic or selfish or anything like that. If we're going to use social media as a barometer for how much people my age care about the world, there's excitement, there's belief that we can actually change the world, and we've been fed this idea ever since we were young, that the key is getting a college education first, and then you can foster real change, and that's what we've been told ever since we were young. Sure, you have those selfish suburbanites who go to school and they think they're going to take over the world with their bachelor's degree in business, but there are a lot of students that are just like me. My mother immigrated from Trinidad. My father, he grew up in a Baltimore neighborhood that looks just like the neighborhood that you see when you go outside today. My parents, they had me the year that they graduated that they graduated high school. And in those days, and to their parents, that meant that they weren't going to go to college. And because of that, they spent the next 21 years of my life just struggling to support their family, struggling to put our needs over their needs. Because according to the system, if you don't get a college degree at a certain time, you aren't afforded the ability to provide for yourself. College, because I saw the way that my parents struggled, it wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. It meant that maybe if I got a college degree first before having children or before starting a family, I could avoid homelessness like my parents had to face and like we had to face. I could avoid having to get hand-me-downs. I could avoid having to be on food stamps. But here I am. I'm in college. I'm working 3 jobs. I'm overworked. I'm tired. I'm depressed. And I'm still on food stamps. And that's a little frustrating for me because I've been sold this idea that college was the key. I'm in the process of experiencing something that a lot of students my age are experiencing at this moment, especially this May when we're graduating. We're all apprehensive of where we're going to go from here because we were told that college is all you needed to go to get your key to just satisfaction. College has presented itself as the key to something it was never meant to solve. Academia is so pervasive that my grandmother in Trinidad, thousands of miles away, thought that sending her kids to American college instead of free Trinidadian college was the key to getting them out of poverty. She believed this so strongly that when my mother told her that she was pregnant with me at the end of her senior year of high school, my grandmother thought that she failed as a mother. What she missed, and what many students my age are discovering now, is that college has not unlocked the door to living a comfortable life. College has not unlocked the door to be able to afford a family, to be able to afford a home. Even in rural Trinidad, where they were supposedly so poor and disenfranchised, they had a farm to feed themselves if there was no work. They lived in a house where there were a bunch of people living to the same house, but at least there they could provide for themselves. And here, there's no possibility for that. The question is, most students know that college doesn't provide for you. When you leave college, there is no guarantee of a job. But why, after knowing all that, and it's very clear that students are unhappy with their status in college, why don't students fight for better treatment? We're too busy. Last year, actually, I took 70 credits. I worked 40 hours a week, add 10 hours for my non-major work, and then 10 more hours for my major work. How much time after that do I have to think about revolution? There's no time even to petition my professors for a better curriculum. There's no time after that to ask for a living wage from my student jobs. Academic fosters an environment of complacency, so there's no wonder there's no time for students to think about revolutionary thought. In between figuring out a way to pay thousands of dollars of tuition, I and many students like me, we have to provide for ourselves because we come from immigrant backgrounds, we come from working poor backgrounds, and we're the first ones in our family to go to college right after getting a high school degree, and some of us were the first ones to even get a high school degree. There's no one to help us through that process. There's no one to help us with funding, and so we have to work multiple jobs. So not only do I have to worry about paying those thousands of dollars of tuition money, I have to worry about rent and living expenses, and there's no wonder that I have no energy to question college or to question the system. In the academic system, it doesn't matter if you have the energy to question the system because you really aren't allowed to question it. In academia, as much as it purports to be the birthplace of innovation, you aren't considered taught unless you fall in line with the popular paradigm. And when I say popular paradigm, I'm not saying that anyone should be able to say whatever thought they want to and we just consider it right. Like, I'm not saying that we should just teach climate denial and that should just be it. No. What I'm saying is, I can be in a class last semester during the election and my professor can say, I wish Obama would save us from this Trump mess, and not be able to question that in class because that's not the popular paradigm. Liberal worship of Obama aside, the setup of college does not allow you to challenge statements that you know are false. And I'll give you an example. I went to a pretty progressive high school, and when we were studying literature, we would have Socratic seminars. So in the outer circle, the students can listen to what the students in the inner circle are discussing. You have your own opinions, you throw in questions, you challenge, you try to mix it up. The whole point is to have a battle of wills, basically, about how you felt about the literature. That's what I thought college would be, and I got a rude awakening. I go into my freshman class, a class about the community and teens, and we're talking about the school-to-prison pipeline. This class is taught by a white upper-class teacher whose kids are in private school, so there's no personal connection there. One of the students, when we're having a discussion about police brutality, she is white, she raises her hand and she says, "No wonder the police are focusing on blacks and Latinos because they're committing all the crimes." Every black and Latino hand raised. You could feel the temperature go up in the room. Everyone was ready to light into her. The professor sees the room. She looks around. She sees how all the black and Latino students are looking, and she says, "All right, guys, let's move to the next part of our discussion." Everyone's still fuming, and just like that, not only were our voices and our humanity denied in this classroom, she didn't get an education. All she got were dirty looks for the rest of the semester. This attitude is not just with white teachers, at least in my experience at Temple. This continues when I take classes in African American studies and I point out to the professor that you're a misogynist and you're a homophobe, and you're putting it under the idea of Africology, but I get told that I'm being brainwashed by the white man, or if we're talking about feminism, by the white woman, even though black women have lived womanism just in their daily lives. At least in high school, when we were having our Socratic seminars, I was talking about Invisible Man, about just authors that we don't hear about in college at all. And so I'm paying thousands of dollars for an education that I could have gotten for free back in high school just because I had a good teacher. This ties into the second way I feel that academic institutions suppress revolutionary thought. Academia can only create a culture of complacency through separation. If we felt actually unified in that classroom where that girl says that she believes that blacks and Latinos are committing all the crimes, we would feel it was our duty to question her on that. We would feel it was our duty to give her an education about that. So this poor, confused little white girl is going to go through her entire life uneducated because we feel ourselves are separate as students instead of a unified body. Academic institutions separate you from your peers, your own families, and most importantly, your community. In terms of our peers, college is not about education, it's about competition. You separate students by GPA, by national status, by race, by gender, by your parents' income, by your own income. Why would I organize, if I'm an honors student taking honors classes, why would I organize with someone that has a 1.4 GPA if I'm not even allowed to take classes with them? If I'm a student that is an international student, why would I organize with Americans that make fun of my English when my school doesn't even address the professors that make fun of my English? Why would I, if I was a white or white adjacent suburbanite, organize with black and brown North Philadelphians if my school does not necessitate that I talk to black and brown North Philadelphians? In this country, you are told what to do from pre-K to 12th grade. Academic institutions clearly prey on this because I can't criticize them because I'm so surprised that I don't have to ask to go to the bathroom like I did when I was in high school. I don't think to ask if I'm so distracted by my complacency because of my financial situation, my separation from my community, I don't think to ask, why am I paying thousands of dollars so I can share a dorm room? Why am I paying thousands of dollars to pay the Temple Police to protect me from my own people? Why am I paying thousands of dollars for a Temple police force that sexually harasses me? Why am I paying thousands of dollars to receive TU alerts about my neighbors and I don't get alerts when I get sexually assaulted by my peers in my school because they go to a nice frat? And finally, because I'm so distracted by complacency forced by financial destitution, because I'm so distracted by separation from my community, from my family, I can't stop to think, why am I paying thousands of dollars at all? We need to get our youth to understand that academia is not the birthplace of knowledge. Academia takes knowledge generated by the people, labels it, quantifies it, qualifies it, moderates it, and commodifies it, gives it a fancy name, and then gives it back to you, forcing you to pay thousands of dollars to pretend that you have knowledge. We need youth. Yet our youth are committed to academic institutions out of economic necessity. Academia has failed our youth, but the key is not to promote a spirit of pessimism in our youth. We need to reverse the spirit of complacency and separation and prioritize education based on community. Universities are able to get away with the heinous crimes that they commit against our minds and bodies of the students, and are able to get away with the crimes that they commit against the spirits and the spaces of the communities, because the students, as privileged as we are, do not believe that we have the power to change anything. For all the knowledge that we're paying to get, we don't have any classes on the power of community engagement. If you think this isn't intentional on the part of the university, look at how Temple University sits in North Philadelphia with no classes on North Philadelphia, with no classes on Du Bois, with no classes on Mumia, with no classes on the Black Panthers. If you think this isn't intentional, consider that we've had 3 events with our Black and Brown Coalition with no support from the academic institution that cares about diversity and multiculturalism. This is why schools like the Saturday Free School are so important. I have free access to decades of knowledge, and yet I'm looked at as a peer. I'm looked at as if I am smart. I'm looked at as if my words matter. Saturday Free School has a village mentality, in that we are all responsible for one another. Academia and academic institutions are too set in their ways for it to have that village mentality once again. The institution is too old, it's too big, it's too expensive, it's too white to meet the needs of the people. Academia is only allowed to get away with its complacent and separatist mentality because it had no challengers. Saturday Free School is that challenger. Thank you.
Memorize this, but so good afternoon, everyone. I want to begin by thanking the conference organizers for putting together such a rich and thoughtful agenda, and to the panelists for their incredible contributions today. I also want to thank the members of the Saturday Free School for their commitment to developing ideological clarity, erudition, and principled unity in the struggle for peace, truth, and liberation from the white supremacist social system and from capitalism. I have been a member of the Free School for a little over a year now, and I can say that there is no other place like it in this city, country, and dare I say the world. I've learned so much from my dear comrades at the Free School and aspire daily to the models of living and learning to which I've borne witness here in North Philadelphia. It is here that I came to the revolutionary thinking of W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., Frantz Fanon, James Baldwin, Huey P. Newton, Karl Marx, Kwame Nkrumah, and so many others. Led by the great Dr. Tony Montero, who has been a great friend and mentor to me and to us all. The Free School is a place of immense revolutionary consequence. I have attended and taught at many schools all over the world. I was born in India and lived there till I was 9 years old before immigrating to Toronto, Canada, where I spent most of my formative years before moving to Georgia in 2002. I've lived in Philadelphia for 8 years now, and of all the teachers I've had, Dr. Montero really sets the bar for what it means to engage in rigorous theoretical work that is unapologetically rooted in revolutionary practice, with the Saturday Free School being the most brilliant manifestation of this. The panels thus far have been addressing with remarkable precision, The panels thus far have been addressing with remarkable precision the fundamental contradictions of our political moment and the monumental question of war and peace that will define the shape of our lifetime and the world's future generations. The forms that political education must necessarily take in order to confront and challenge these realities, the theoretical innovations that have come out of our conversations together, and of course, the need for intercivilizational unity in the fight for a world free of white supremacy and capitalist exploitation. I'm honored to be speaking today on the failures of the current education system in meeting the ideological and spiritual needs of the people at a time like the one we're in, and the continued complicity of the neoliberal university with the interests of the war hawks that rule this country. Today, U.S. imperialism is the common oppressor of people all over the world, here in North America, in South and Central America, Asia, Africa, the Caribbean, as well as the Pacific, and the neoliberal university is its bastion. Because of this development, people have an implicit distrust of academic, who, as Meghna pointed out in her presentation earlier, condescend to working people by objectifying them in the process of study, while denying the reality and radical possibilities autonomous to their life worlds. Indeed, the academic professoriate is at the helm of the misleadership class, with the university serving as an ideological surrogate for the 1%, a finishing school, as it were, that prepares them to uphold and reproduce capitalist ideology, specifically in its neoliberal form, which itself sustains itself on a diet of white supremacist values. Even the disciplinary formations and funding structures reflect this reality. For example, the government encourages pursuit of study in certain area studies, it's called, in order, so, studying like Middle East studies, or, studies focused on disciplines created to study different parts of the world. I discovered that a lot of the funding for these programs comes out of the state, right? Because it's trying to, research, gain more knowledge about a particular region, for the purposes of expanding U.S. empire. We might think of the GRASP lab at Penn, which has defense contracts with the U.S. military to develop drone technology, which, results in drones being dropped on the people of Afghanistan, Pakistan. Under the Obama regime, we saw, a proliferation of drone strikes. Under a neoliberal ideological order, every answer, moreover, in terms of how just, as a teacher, I teach, I'm an adjunct at Temple right now, but I also adjunct at Community College of Philadelphia. And what I realize is that under a neoliberal ideological order, every answer has to be recognized, even that of the oppressor, which means that you have people graduating with the belief that they can have an opinion as to whether the oppression of people is even real. So, that's, it's everything is an argument under it's the relativity, As we have realized in our studies and conversations at the Free School, the answer is clear. We must abandon any course of study that renders the condition of the world's oppressed a matter of conjecture and debate, as it is a cunning habit of neoliberalism to force this hand. There is no love for people here in the academy, no respect for the struggles they face, and most of all, no recognition that the wind that sweeps through college campuses also blows through the rest of Philadelphia, which is currently being devastated by the greed of institutions such as the University of Pennsylvania, Temple University, Drexel, and others which maintain themselves in a neo-colonial relation with the rest of working Philadelphia. As such, we cannot simply talk about the adjunct crisis, the fact that the university, an institution that claims its origins in the European Enlightenment, relies on a contingent workforce of educators who receive minimal pay, no health care, or basic social securities to speak of, without speaking about the fact that the university itself sustains itself on the exploited labor of Black and brown people in Philadelphia. So, you can think of the roles that they play in these institutions. I teach at Temple, and I can see this reality in my observations of security guards who work there, the office staff, the housekeeping staff, the food service staff, even the bike cops who are hired to police the rapidly expanding campus, protecting the interests of white students at the expense of Black and brown residents to whom this community belongs. These schools do not exist for the people. At the Community College of Philadelphia, where I also serve as an adjunct, students are unable to complete their associate's degrees because they are often working multiple jobs and cannot find the time or resources to take courses. I had one student who is a home health care worker who told me she worked 60 to 70 hours every week. When I was in college, I had a job working 40 hours a week as a retail employee, and I found it difficult to, complete my work even then. Just to think about my student who was working, 80 hours a week, doing a really difficult job, which, home health care is, it's difficult to complete any work, any kind of meaningful scholarship with care and thought, if these are the circumstances you are facing. This is what we mean when we say that the education system is aligned with a neoliberal order. The goal isn't to liberate the people, but to feed them the lie that they are the failures because they didn't put in the work to educate themselves. Never is the capitalist structure that necessitates this reality ever questioned. Here we must also remember that it is in the interest of the white establishment to deny education to our people. Educated and organized Black and brown workers are a threat to the white supremacist social system, as we have previously discussed in the previous panels. Thus, it is in their interest to keep shutting schools down in our communities and open juvenile detention centers instead. It is in their interest to add more metal detectors and police officers to their payroll instead of providing quality programs in music, art, literature, mathematics, and the sciences, courses that enrich and broaden the developing intellect of young people. Likewise, radical and progressive educators in the system, there can be no philosophy of praxis grounded in sound revolutionary strategy, which addresses the complex nature of white supremacy, class conflict, and hegemony, so long as we operate according to the rules of the academy. As we know from the case of Dr. Montero, challenging the imperatives of the ruling elite who run these schools would likely get you dismissed from your position. Okay. In the earlier panel, and actually I wanted to talk about the schools to prisons pipeline, which you brought up. In the earlier panel, Nandita discussed the necessity of thinking with dialectics through triads, what we might call the trialectic when we think about the relationship between the white planter, the white worker, and the black worker in the context of the United States. As many thinkers have pointed out, the plantation system today is continued in the form of the carceral state, which holds more black people captive today than were enslaved in the 19th century. As we know, the 13th Amendment did not abolish slavery. Instead, white people sought to keep African Americans in the same position using the convict leasing system and the modern prison system, whose moral calculus and disciplinary practices are rooted in the plantation system. The present education system is a liberal doppelganger of the prison system. If the prison is a place, in other words, for putting away non-compliant people of color, the school is a place to create a black and brown comprador class that purveys lies of racial progress to its own people in exchange for a seat at the table chaired by white supremacists. They are the two faces of the same moral, political, and economic regime. This is why today we see the disproportionate and discriminatory disciplining of black students in the academy, and also in secondary schools as well. What we're seeing is a preservation of a system that purports to use incarceration as a tool of education. At a time like this, when people are increasingly taking a stand against the destructive policies of the global ruling elite, which the people have fought tooth and nail in their struggle against neoliberal and neocolonial capital, we need an education program capable of preparing them ideologically in the struggle for liberation. As Mao observes, the revolution comes out of the people's correct understanding of the forces that oppress them. Just in the past week, this country has dropped bombs on Syria and Afghanistan, escalating tensions with Russia while creating military provocations with North Korea. At a time like this, people need an education that allows them to arrive at a correct analysis of their oppression. An education such as the one that we have all had the benefit of receiving at the free school should activate knowledge that exposes the savagery of U.S. imperialism and allows us to identify all enemies of people in their struggle for freedom from racial and economic oppression. However, this knowledge will not come from studying the world through the categories of social science alone, a discipline which has betrayed people on the whole by studying them, as we talked about, but doing little to advance a radical transformation in their circumstances. As such, we must oppose this kind of book worship. As Mao writes, quote, "The method of studying the social sciences exclusively from the books is likewise extremely dangerous and may even lead one on the road of counter-revolution. Rather than being colonized intellectuals who cooperate with the oppressor rather than joining the struggle with their own people, artists and intellectuals must strive to become organic to the people's struggle in order to form what Gramsci called a counter-hegemonic bloc." I'm almost done. Sorry. Because of the structure and function of the ivory tower in American society, we cannot progress as human beings because, as Baldwin reminds us, white people cannot be looked at as models for living so long as they cling on to their whiteness for validation. This indeed is a critique of liberal humanism advanced by Fanon and why he is so important to the study of a genuinely liberatory humanities. Often, when white people tell us to be human, it is their desired fantasy of how we should be, select performances that they deem fit to be included in their repertoire of humanism. And this is unfortunately the logic of humanism that underlies curricula in the education system today. This is also why we cannot truly teach Baldwin's philosophy in the liberal spaces of universities, as we talked about in the free school, because neoliberal pedagogy forces you to recognize whiteness as one of many possible identities. However, we know that in order to move forward in unity, white people must abandon the fiction of whiteness. And that is what it is. It is a fiction that has developed historically. The neoliberal university fails to meet the spiritual and intellectual needs of the people, in addition, of course, to their material needs. The narrative of diversity and conditional inclusion allows a liberal establishment to justify the status quo by gaining the favor of a handful of token black and brown people who are then made gatekeepers and enforcers of capitalism and the white supremacist state. Indeed, it is for the sake of the diversity project that identity politics and the language of faux radicalism exists, not for the people. Whenever there is identity politics, capitalism uses the schism to further embed itself in human societies by seizing upon our collective traumas. The analytical terms of the academy have little explanatory power for working people to analyze their lived experience so that they can wrest the social power they need to transform it. As Mao writes, we need books, but we must oppose book worship, which is divorced from the actual situation. The posturing of the white leftist academic today, who has been the object of our critique on many an occasion at the free school, the white left, and what to do. The posturing of the white leftist academic today is a perfect example of what Mao is talking about here. We might say the same of the hideous brand of neoliberal identity politics that renders clunky sociological terms fashionable. This identitarianism, I think, is a reflex of the bourgeois order. Its objective isn't to challenge white and capitalist oppression, rather it allows the bourgeoisie to languish in their own experiences. It's an affront to the people who have a much more complex and flexible understanding of who they are and what it means to be human in this world. And I think when we talked about intercivilizational unity, the different ways in which people think is the most, exciting part, because there's no real. You can't learn about the it's kind of a joke to have a humanities division in this institution, right? That's kind of my understanding. It is for this reason that we at the Free School begin with the understanding that the categories of the Enlightenment are insufficient when it comes to analyzing conditions faced by black and brown workers in the US and the people of the Third World. The Free School, by contrast, arms the people with the ideology to recognize their oppressors correctly so that we can wage a successful movement of liberation against them. Here at the Free School, we have affirmed our commitment to scientific analysis in an effort to arrive at an accurate understanding of events and processes of world historical consequence, analyses that are rooted in the people's struggle for liberation from oppression. We have cultivated an intellectual community that seeks the right path to overthrowing the yoke of imperial tyranny, we have arrived at many brilliant analyses together. We predicted the anti-establishment character of the Trump voters. We saw this as an expression of their class anger against political formations that had sold them out. In our pursuit of ideological clarity, we have discovered a mutual disenchantment with identity politics and reactionary cultural nationalisms that cooperate with the ruling class and keep our communities divided. As Baldwin writes in Down at the Cross, color is not a human or a personal reality. It is a political reality. And it is on this principle that we at the Free School have united in revolutionary intercivilizational unity against our common oppressor. We denounced the liberal marches on Washington as well, in addition to the, our analysis of Trump and so on and so forth. We have, drawing on the rich oeuvre of work produced by the loving revolutionary labor of so many thinkers, particularly Du Bois and Baldwin, but also the beloved Huey P. Newton and the brilliant Frantz Fanon and so many others, we have opened up new horizons for speaking about the color line and devote our revolutionary energies to effacing its dominance over human societies. And I'll just end with something that Mumia said at the A Revolutionary Love Supreme event organized by the Black and Brown Coalition at Temple. In his address to Temple students at the Revolutionary Love Supreme event, Mumia Abu Jamal reminds us that education is for liberation. And he says that we must study the world as though our life depends on it, because it does. And it's a longer quote, but I just found this idea so powerful. And I actually don't have the longer quote. I have to pull it up, but I'd be happy to share it with you after, if you want to hear the rest of it. But he says, we must study the world as though our life depends on it, because it does. And this is why I love the Free School so much, because when we study the world, we really are looking to study it deeply, but not in the form of book worship, but in a way that attends to the actual conditions that people are facing. And when we study the world, Baldwin says, we see that the dominant social system is at war with its own people. And this is the quote that's on the conference flyer, right? He says, as soon as we get a real education, we will realize that the society is at war with the people. And when we see this, people will see that they have a duty to fight and assert their political and economic control over their own circumstances. So I'll just end there. But thank you.
As I was listening to the panelists and the panels before this, and I was thinking of the things I had prepared to say, I realized that everything has more or less been said already. By people who speak better than I do. So, but I'm gonna keep it short. So I'm a student in a university, a graduate student, and it is from that perspective that I speak. And as we discuss the moment today and how to move forward, I think that we must not forget the lessons of history. We must ask, what purpose does a university serve in the social and economic system that we live in? Or more broadly, why must people be educated? And the famous economist Adam Smith, who believed in a free market and the invisible hand of God, gave an honest answer. Even though he thought the government must not interfere in society, he did think it had a responsibility to educate people. Why was this? He said that the education of the rich can be left to them, but the poor must be educated. Otherwise, they could do dreadful things. But the problem in this is that if your education were really about gaining knowledge, learning to think for oneself, if it really lived up to its high ideals, then one would start to critically question the society we live in, a society which allows people to be poor in the first place. This is precisely the contradiction in getting educated. The education system in a society is designed within a larger social and economic system, and its purpose is to continue this system. That is, simply put, it is to keep the poor poor and the rich rich. On the other hand, if one really wants to get educated, then one must start questioning the very system we live in. And this is the meaning I got from the quote that Divya just referred to, this is a contradiction that I think Baldwin was referring to when he said, one of the paradoxes of education is that precisely at the point where you develop a conscience, you must find yourself at war with society. I want to shift for a bit and talk about India, where I'm from, and talk of the education system there. So during colonial times, when the Indian education system was being discussed in the British Parliament, Thomas Macaulay, he was a member, declared that India had contributed nothing to knowledge, of course. He also declared that the majority of Indians were far too ignorant to be educated in high British ideals. He suggested the way to solve the problem when he said, "We must at present do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions whom we govern. A class of persons Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, in opinions, in morals, and in intellect." The universities that the British established in India successfully carried this out. Even till today, the universities teach as if India had no real history. Of course, as if Africa had no real history, and all history was based in Europe. And this task is carried out by the very interpreters that Macaulay talked about. In some way, the situation has parallels in the US. The education system is firmly embedded in the structure of white supremacy. It serves to justify the white establishment. We must recognize that the purpose of the education system, historically, was never to truly educate the people. Now, sometimes this has faced resistance. The universities have certainly never been great sites of resistance, but when we think of the 60s and 70s, we do think of strong student movements. The fight to bring black studies in the universities was a fight led by black students. This was a movement that recognized the content and character of the knowledge it was getting and fought back against it. Some important parts of the Black Panther Party started at the university. These were movements that did have a significant impact. To study this, I was reading the governmental reports written during the period because oftentimes the ruling class studies us better than we study ourselves. One significant report is on the crisis of democracy. It has Samuel Huntington, who was a key member of the Carter administration, and others, and it speaks of these times. It says that the universities have failed in their task of indoctrination, and we need to bring moderation to the, in quotes, excess of democracy that is taking place through the strikes and protests by workers, students, and ordinary people. Another report describes what the students wanted in that period. It said, a new culture is emerging primarily among students. Most of its members have high ideals and fears. They stress the need for humanity, equality. They fear that nuclear war will make them the last generation in history. They see the Indochina War as an onslaught by a technological giant upon the peasant people of a small, harmless, and backward nation. These high ideals sound as present today as they were then. We are yet to find humanity or equality. And the fear of nuclear war remains real, perhaps more so now. And yet we do not find any new culture among the students. What is the reason for this? I think there are two main reasons. One is that education in the university became much more firmly tied to getting jobs. This was partly because more jobs became available which required a professional training which came to pass for education. Rising tuition levels put many students in debt and served to discipline them, so they would focus on getting jobs and on paying back their debts. This was one reason. Second, even as some of the past movements were brutally crushed by the state, perhaps more subtly, their radical ideology was co-opted. The universities pretended to talk about these ideas, but the focus shifted from people and humanity to the individual. Oppression, and hence resistance to it, was now identified at the level of the individual. This came with an attack upon political organization and on the development of political ideology. So-called radical professors actively participated in this attack till their disconnect from everyday struggles of ordinary people was complete, and their radicalism had been reduced to performances to the white establishment. This is why the only form of political action that emerges takes the shape of identity politics. It encourages individualism and has a lack of accountability to people. It never talks of humanity. Students who come into this setup into the university with the hope of finding moral direction, and that's not all of them, but the ones who do, get thrown at with the idea that the world is too complicated for them to possibly understand. Any attempt at clarity of thought is actively opposed because it misses the complexities and the nuances. And the world is complex, which is why we must find truth in struggle and practice. Instead, faculty teach students that there is no truth. They teach an acceptance in thought and defeat in action. And we must remember, passive acceptance is more bewildering than outright rejection. And of course, the behavior of the faculty goes back to the material. We just need to look around in Philadelphia. The universities with their billion-dollar grants gentrify neighborhoods and destroy communities. Meanwhile, the tenured faculty talk of having freedom in thought. But this freedom is nothing more than the freedom to continue to be paid by big businesses, corporations, and donors. It is nothing more than the freedom to preside over precarious graduate students and decide what constitutes as thought, which is why it is freedom for themselves, but only justice for others. Anyone who dares to challenge the prevailing order is dealt with in a heavy-handed way. Baldwin captures the liberal community perfectly when he talks of their behavior during the McCarthy era. He says, "Those years taught me something about the irresponsibility and cowardice of the liberal community which I will never forget. Their performance then, yet more than the combination of ignorance and arrogance with which this community has always protected itself against the deepest implications of black suffering, persuaded me that brilliance without passion is nothing more than sterility." There's more. For truth is a two-edged sword, and if one is not willing to be pierced by that sword, even to the extreme of dying on it, then all of one's intellectual activity is a masturbatory delusion and a wicked and dangerous fraud. End quote. Meanwhile, the colonized intellectuals have become far removed from the people they speak of. They speak in a language that only the white establishment understands and enjoy the material benefits their positions give. In a sense, Macaulay's words have been perfectly realized. And really, in short, the universities have failed the people. This is important to understand because this really goes beyond the university itself. You can see echoes of it in the labor movement today, where all kinds of experts and professionals tell workers what is best for them. Independent political thought is actively discouraged, but identity politics and representation is encouraged. Deals are cut which allow labor leaders to maintain their high-paying position. And this is what makes this political moment today so important. The economy continues to be in a bad state. Unemployment levels are getting lower only because people have stopped looking for work. This is a historical moment of crisis. Such historical moments must come with new forms of revolutionary thought and activity. They must come with ideological struggle and political organization. But in this moment, the universities are incapable of providing the knowledge or setting for the emergence of independent political thought. We must create new spaces of knowledge creation. Perhaps foremost, such spaces must be close to ordinary and working people. They must be connected to their struggles and must work to speak in a language that people can understand. This is our only hope for achieving the high ideals of the past and to imagine a better future. Thank you.
So I just want to first start by thanking my fellow panelists. Kayla, I just want to say you are the organic intellectual that we speak of in the Saturday Free School. And what that means is nothing that any of us has said today, all the profound ideas and all the profound academic knowledge that we've discussed, it is your story, it is your experience exemplified that drives people, that moves people. It is all of what is captured in academic language is in your story. And so we appreciate you saying that. And I want you to remember one thing that Du Bois says, and if you haven't read it yet, there's a book, Darkwater, Voices from Within the Veil. And he's got a chapter called The Damnation of Women. And he says in that chapter that I most sincerely doubt that any other race of women could have brought its fineness up through so devilish a fire. And so always remember that you exemplify that. So what of black women? I most sincerely doubt that any other race of women could brought its finest up through so devilish a fire. And so remember that any of those moments where you feel that you need that refreshment, okay? To Ms. Divya, I first learned of Ms. Divya through Dr. Montero and Yvonne when she was going through the struggle over at the community college. And then I got a chance to know her a little bit through the Saturday school. And I just want to say that she reminds me of a quote that Mumia actually said at one of the Du Bois conferences we had. And I said, who is this girl? I mean, she is to stand up against an institution unapologetically. I said, damn, who is this sister right here? And so she reminded me of a profound Du Bois quote which said, let us be insane with courage. And I said, this woman exemplifies that. So I was so glad when I saw her walk into the Saturday Free School to be in that space with her. And then Raju, all the work that he does, and to also go with all those who put the panels and the conferences together. It's a lot of humble work. I mean, for me, I'm an adjunct instructor over at Drexel. I have difficulty putting a PowerPoint presentation together, and these folks put websites together like it's nothing. So I want to give those folks a round of applause for all the humble hard work they put in. And last but not least, I want to thank Dr. Montero. As a graduate student coming in 2008, I came into Africana Studies. I had studied undergraduate Africana Studies at Lafayette College. I had come into Master's Africana Studies and eventually hopefully finish my PhD and hopefully next year in Africana Studies. But as you will know, I'm in Africana Studies at Temple, but not of Africana Studies at Temple. And so in getting to meet Dr. Montero, him and I were passing back and forth in the hallway. I said, look, who is this smooth brother just going back and forth with this jive smile with Sister Pam Africa walking beside him? I said, who is this cat? And it turns out that he would end up being my intellectual father. And so Dr. Montero, and I wanted to say a little bit about Dr. Montero, because Dr. Montero in many ways, and I'll talk about the Free Saturday School, but he in many ways had saved me. At some point after being in the master's program, I didn't know if I wanted to continue the PhD. I thought I came into the wrong discipline. I had come out of studying Kwame Nkrumah, as Jibu knows, and looked at revolutionary ideas, and I didn't get that in the master's program. Du Bois was not talked about, was not mentioned one time. Baldwin was not whispered at all. And so I came from a program that we studied Baldwin for an entire semester, did independent study. So it wasn't until really reaching Dr. Montero I decided, okay, that I need to get more knowledge. There's more work needs to be done, but it was Dr. Montero who really saved me in that sense. And I want to talk about Dr. Montero because I was with Dr. Montero when he first started the Radical Philosophy School at Temple. Right after the philosophy school, he had this grand idea to start the Free Saturday School. And so I said, okay, Doc, I'll help you get the classes. And so we knew we went into the office, we were getting free classes at Temple, and then all of a sudden, Temple called whiff that we were giving away free education to the community. Now here we are in the midst of a deep depression. Let's keep it funky. It's not a recession, it's an ongoing depression. There ain't much change for poor and working class people of all colors, right? Here we are, Doc had this grand idea to give out free education to the community that Temple was gentrifying at the time. And they had the audacity to say, because we won over by 30 minutes one time, that we were no longer allowed to have classes at Temple. And so after this whole episode happens with Dr. Montero, and we end up moving the Saturday school here to Church of Advocate, which we're very grateful for. And just recently, I was talking to Dr. Montero about how he felt about this, the 5th year anniversary. And Doc said, this is a man who had a huge fight with Temple University, job taken away from him. And what does he say? He said, this is the best thing that ever happened to him. I said, damn, the best thing. He said, because he had the opportunity to be amongst all of us here. He had an opportunity to fulfill the vision of what he saw education being. And so his humility, that wise maturity, that inner security that drives Doc, defines his love for us and for the purpose what he sees education fulfilling for the people in the community. And so that is one thing I want to give Doc a round of applause for that he taught me, is that beauty of that. And so similar to Raju, I had this grand speech laid out Divya style, you know what I'm saying? I was up to like 5 in the morning, 'cause that's what we do as graduate students, we're up till 5 in the morning. And And I said, you know what, let me write this beautiful speech I'll probably use as a chapter in my dissertation. And by the way, for graduate students, the struggle is just as real as it is for undergraduate students. For my 8 years, I have not received 1 ounce of funding at Temple University. I've had to work at bars as bouncer, my little ass as a bouncer. Excuse my language, I know we're in the church. This is the longest I've ever been in the church, so I'm allowed a couple curse words, you know. Only Doc can get me to come to church, let's put it that way. I worked as a bouncer. I've taught at elementary schools. I recently worked four or five jobs at the same time. I was teaching 2 classes at Drexel while having 2 externships at Temple, all while trying to work my PhD. And mind you, Doc was my advisor, so I had to almost start my PhD over because we had developed this beautiful idea, which I'm still doing and testing, but had to start my PhD pretty much over, my research. And so lately, I decided to leave my extern positions because I was being exploited. I ended up doing so much work for all those that I wasn't getting paid for. Now, this is the structure of capitalism, right? You exploit labor, so on and so forth. But nonetheless, I recently have had to go home and work as a landscaper. My brother owns a landscaping company just to make ends meet, just to pay rent. And so the struggle is that real for mostly all students that you described and your students you described, and for many of the graduate students who have to try to go through this process. Staying up till 4 in the morning, but it is the Baldwins, it is the Du Bois that drive us, it is the work that we are doing, it is our purpose, what we see in wanting to change the world. And so, knowing that I figured that I was crossing things out as Jibu was talking, crossed off 30% of my speech. As Dr. Montero was crossing, crossed off 30% of my speech. As others were talking, crossed off. As some people were quoting Baldwin, crossed off my Baldwin quotes. So I realized I did have a second speech just in case I was a little shorter. That maybe will just exemplify some of the words of Jimmy Baldwin and some of the words of the great Du Bois, and then perhaps I'll talk a little about white supremacy in a deeper lens, conceptual lens, to kind of paint the picture for us. But I'll start off with a question. It says, is education desirable? For those that oppose this question, what are the professed objects that they argue education cannot achieve? For that matter, what is the purpose of education? Or what is it that we wish education to accomplish? Should our education be situated in relation to the individual psyche, or should it be in relation to producing productive citizens? What are the differences? Is the production of knowledge simply to buttress the established order, or should it be to change society and liberate society? In order to have a real critique of academic knowledge, these are some of the questions that we first must engage. And in order to try to answer these questions, we have to look more deeply at the relationship between education and the social order. And in the context of the West, this means the focus of our analysis, which has been today, is on education as an instrument of white supremacy ideology. In other words, as a mechanism central to the maintenance and sustainment and the glorified perpetuation of the capitalist mode of production. For as Du Bois tells us, the economic theory determines what a student could and should know in Dusk of Dawn. And so in this brief presentation, I just want to use some of the words of Jimmy Baldwin, some of the words of Du Bois, and I'm even going to throw in some of the words of Bertrand Russell, whose social analysis I actually like on this particular topic. And so I'll start with Russell first. In a book called Education in the Social Order, written in earlier parts of the 20th century, he says the following: "We are faced with the paradoxical fact that education has become one of the chief obstacles to intelligence and freedom of thought. For Russell, education in society has both historically and into the present served the purposes of the state. The purpose of the state, then, is to train citizens, non-thinking beings, unquestioning beings, and not individual thinkers." Which is really interesting because all the thinkers they glorify have been the opposite, right, in society. Thereby making us convenient tools of the government. And so this is important because in engaging this very question of what it is that education is in relationship to, it allows us to understand that the cultivation of the individual psyche is not the same thing as production of a good citizen. As a creative thinking individual, you become an agent or actor in the world who possesses the ability to exercise your will as you become aware of power and the social, political, economic, and cultural problems that influence your life world and the world around you. As a citizen, our fundamental characteristic is vastly different. The citizen is the one who cooperates, and I quote, in intention, if not in fact. Russell further informed us that the citizens, and I quote, are conceived by governments as persons who admire the status quo and are prepared to exert themselves for its preservation. What does that mean? That means that the aim of government is to produce men of this type to the exclusion of all other types. Because in many ways, social orders or states, they do not survive unless they can control minds, as Jibu was talking about. One of the major mechanisms in dominant ideology is the ability to control how we think. Therefore, those who desire to become productive citizens, as we so prevalently see in many of the institutions that try to produce us today, they frame the citizen as the ideal, when in reality, the citizen is the absence of all of which we strive to be as humans. It attempts to stifle our creativity, our innovation, our need to become more decent and fuller human beings, living with purpose and intention in our attempt to create a better humanity for the future world, or as Du Bois says, a world for the immortal child. In other words, simply being a citizen then in this society is equivalent to acquiescing in the powers that be. Consequently, education that has the focus of making a good citizens takes on two forms, either support for or overthrow of the existing system. And to Du Bois, in Darkwater, Voices Within the Veil, W.E.B. Du Bois tells us that, and I quote, all human problems then center in the immortal child, and his education is the problem of problems. In the treatment of the child, the world foreshadows its future, end quote. For Du Bois, he understands that our educational aims have never been to fulfill the development of the child, especially the black child. Because why? And I quote, the world regards and always has regarded education first as a means of buttressing up the established order of things rather than improving it, end quote. This is why in the wealthiest society in the world, half of the entire American population is living in or near poverty, 150 million plus people. And the poverty threshold is vastly underestimated now. We're talking about a family of four making $22,000 a year, yet insurance would average about $15,000, leaving $6,000 for all their expenses. That's $40,000 still inaccurate. At the same time, with the world's 62 richest people owning the same wealth as the 3.6 billion poorest people. Or while the current movement shifts away from the public education to the privatization of our schools. Furthermore, this is why we spend over $600 billion on defense spending and a fraction of the cost on our educations. In this society, we do not value people, but things, profits. And Du Bois forces us to think about an entire paradigm shift that asks us the question, what world would we create if we thought in terms of the child? Therefore, for Du Bois, we must teach, and I quote, that the world is not perfection, but development. That the object of education is manhood and womanhood, clear reason, individual talent and genius, and the spirit of service and sacrifice, and not simply frantic effort to avoid changes in the present institutions. Therefore, for Du Bois, end quote, his aim was to develop human souls, to make all intelligent, to discover special talents and genius, and to train students to know the world, for the object of education is the child itself, and not what the child does or makes. As for Jimmy Baldwin in his essay, A Talk to Teachers, in the collection of essays, he suggests, and I quote, the crucial paradox which confronts us here that the whole process of education occurs within a social framework and is designed to perpetuate the aims of society. For example, in a capitalist society, everyone is encouraged to become, in paraphrasing Malcolm, a blood-sucking capitalist, end quote. Or, in other words, the owner of the means of production, the one who exploits labor to produce surplus value that gets turned into private profits that go to who? The capitalist at the top, not the worker at the bottom. In other words, the fruit eaters are not the fruit growers in this society. What are we taught in schools? To maximize our profit by minimizing their costs. The fundamental phrase found in most microeconomics courses, the phrase that I first heard, and as soon as they said that, I looked around the classes, and they said, well, you do that by exploiting labor. I continued to look around. I said, am I the only up in here that finds that to be a problem? Needless to say, I went to the registrar office and dropped microeconomics that day. I didn't need to be in the class. That was how the class was going to function. By exploiting labor, produced as much surplus value as possible. I said, no, I'm cool with that. I'm good. In other words, the idea is if you maximize your profit by minimizing your costs, you accumulate as much wealth to live in isolation and fulfill life by accomplishing the American dream. What is the American dream? Because 7 out of 8 families don't live the American dream today. That was a study done a couple years ago by Richard Wolff. What does that mean? That means that the American dream, you'd have to make over almost $140,000 a year. That's not even, that's just getting by, really. That's not, you might be able to pay your mortgage, you might be able to pay your car, whatever the case is. You're just getting through, in a sense. And I can tell you right now, I'm not making anywhere near $138,000 a year. I make about $2,200 per class I teach at Drexel. You dig? And that's 70% of the folks who teach are adjuncts like ourselves, like many of us, scraping to get by, but love our students, want to connect with our students, want to show them what the purpose of education really is, right? And so the lesson that Baldwin teaches us is that one easily falls victim to becoming what it is society trains you to be, what society tells you are, as opposed to what you want to be or should be, or what your cultural legacy is in relationship to the existent racist social order. Therefore, Baldwin believed, and I quote, as one begins to become conscious, one begins to examine society in which he is being educated. And it's for this reason that Baldwin says, and I quote, the purpose of education is to create in a person the ability to look at the world for himself, to make his own decisions, to say to himself, this is black and this is white, to decide for himself whether there is a God in heaven or not, to ask questions of the universe and then to learn to live with those questions is the way he achieves his own identity. But no society is really anxious to have that kind of person around. What society really ideally wants is a citizenry which will simply obey the rules of society. If a society succeeds in this, that society is about to perish. The obligation of anyone who thinks of himself as responsible is to examine the society and try to change it, and to fight it at no matter what risk. This is the only home society has. This is the only way society changes, end quote Baldwin. And so in giving some of these examples, I just wanted to kind of position the relationship of education with the social order and some of the consequences of that development. And so what does that really mean for our project here at the Saturday Free School? It means the following in many ways. One of the fundamental questions we ask is, in the interest of human freedom or progress, what is truth? Does it lie on the side of the oppressed or the oppressor, the exploited or the exploited, the well-to-do or the struggling? In order to answer this question, an individual first has to start by seeking what? Ideological clarity. For having clarity about the ideas that have created the modern world gives us explanatory power in understanding the present social conditions in which we live and are connected to. In seeking this clarity, the individual must then take a position of critical engagement with the world around him or her to eventually use the knowledge or what it is that he or she finds in their search for truth for what? For purposeful action in the transformation of a society that is always in dialectical motion. And if an individual is truly committed to finding social truths in the society with the intentions of changing it, he or she has no choice but to allow suffering to speak, for this is the condition of truth. For me, I have a very interesting story. When I grew up, my mother is Irish, my father is African American. And I grew up here in Palmyra, New Jersey, across the bridge. And I had a lot of uncles who lived in Camden, New Jersey. I used to go to Camden, New Jersey quite often. And my uncles used to play the jazz and the blues. And I said, what is this music? Similar to Du Bois when he first discovers the sorrow songs, right? Trying to make sense of this emotion in the music. What is this music? What story is it telling? And so growing up, I always tried to make sense of human suffering. And once you ask that question, and once you go down that path, you have no choice but to become a revolutionary to some extent. Although this society nurtures apathy as if it is a virtue, you must be courageous, as many of the examples are, to fight. All those forms. And so when I grew up, I had my first encounter in 4th grade. I asked a teacher, I first started trying to read Malcolm X's autobiography in 4th grade. You dig what I'm saying? And so I had a teacher, and I asked him what he thought about Malcolm X, and he said, well, I didn't really like Malcolm X. And so I'm like, well, why didn't you like Malcolm X? So we got to talk, and he said, well, I didn't agree with he calling whites racist. I said, what was wrong with him calling whites devils? And what happened? So of course they try to suspend me in school. I'm a straight A student, what have you. That was my first encounter with the education system. I said it's going to be a long fight from here on out, you know. Nonetheless, you can imagine his face. He's probably said, who is this light-skinned brother with freckles talking how much loves Malcolm X, you know? So last, I want to end on a couple things. I completely agree with Dr. Montero's analysis of white supremacy as a social system, and I want to tease that out just a bit. When we're talking about white supremacy, and I'm going to use sort of Charles Mills, who has a book From Class to Race, an excellent analysis of white supremacy as a socio-political system. And in this analysis, he talks about we really need to take white supremacy as a theoretical object in its own right. Well, what does that really mean? It means that we have to look at it as a global social system comparable to significance, but not in historical age to Marxist class analysis or to feminism's patriarchal system. And so what we have to do then is reconceptualize the scope of white supremacy. In other words, retrieve white supremacy from the historical lexicon, which we oftentimes think of as individual Ku Klux Klan members, individual races. No, we're talking about an entire system. And this is very important because the system is one in which is defined by denoting domination of whites over non-whites. And so in other words, it is a macro system that is run by and in the interests of whites. This is very important to understand because the critical step for us then is establishing the fact that it's a sociological and political truth that power relations in many ways can survive the formal dismantling of former epochs. In other words, racism or white supremacy, it changes its forms. Think of it as a social cancer of our epoch. What that means is you have dominative races. Think of the old-fashioned racism of the South, the blatant racism, the Donald Trump racist in a sense. Well then, there's the aversive racist. That's the liberal of today. The ones that, hey, I recognize past injustice, I'm about equality. But when placed in certain experimental situations has still been shown to hold negative beliefs and attitudes for people of color. And then you have meta-racism, which operates so deeply connected to the culture, as Jibu was talking about, and ideology, that it functions automatically within the capitalist mode of production. And so it's very important that we have to understand the ways in which racism is going to change faces, or white supremacy is going to change faces as it develops and becomes more dangerous of sorts. So more from a de jure to a de facto type of form. To give a definition, if we had to give a definition, I like this definition that Mills quotes from Francis Lee Ansley, who suggests that white supremacy as a socio-political system is the following. It's a political, economic, and cultural system in which whites overwhelmingly control power and material resources, conscious and unconscious ideas of white domination and non-white subordination are daily reenacted across the broad array of institutions and social settings. That's a really powerful definition. I think that sort of gives us a deeper understanding of what we're talking about when we say white supremacy as a social system. So in other words, what we have to realize is, as many of us someone was talking about Cuba earlier, that this is in fact a transnational, a global, and a historic domination of white Europe over non-white Europe and white settlers over non-white slaves and indigenous peoples, thereby making Europeans in many ways the lords of humankind. Lastly, I want to say that, and Jibu talked about this, and I'll end on this. The future will depend on, maybe I'll end with Du Bois in this sense. Du Bois is talking about the problem of the 20th century is a problem of the color line. What he's really saying, as Doc would articulate, is he's talking about the crisis of the future world being the crisis of the color line. Race is not going to just be the centrality of this question of, the color line is not just going to be the centrality of this question of race and race relations to the American social framework, but it's going to exceed its concrete manifestations. It's also going to mean that it's the class line, the gender line, the sexual orientation line, the difference between normal and abnormal identities as they develop in American society. This is of fundamental importance because then the argument in some ways becomes, is the crisis of the future world the crisis of whiteness? And so lastly, in the critique of capitalism, this is very important because a lot of times we think of capitalism as this system and we have this way of being distracted about capitalism. In other words, you can argue everything within the framework, but we never actually question capitalism as a system in and of itself. And so it's not going to be a matter of vacillating as America has done, and even in some ways the Soviet has done, between private capitalism and state capitalism. In other words, to move towards socialism to some extent, we'd have to revolutionize the production process. Because this system of capitalism is one that develops by refinement from feudalism, just like feudalism was developed by refinement from slavery. What does that mean? In each system, you have a similar relationship. Master-slave, lord-serf, capitalist-worker. In all three systems, the cardinal principle driving the system is exploitation of labor, right? The only difference in some ways is it's a lesser forcible subjection of that labor in the process of a capitalist system. That's why Nkrumah would call it the gentleman's method of slavery, right? Because you think you have more freedom in a capitalist system than you did as a slave. But in reality, you're almost worse off. And this is of fundamental importance because we can't get caught up in the paralyzing frameworks that we often do in the educational systems and in educational settings. But it really is, we have to learn what critical thought takes place when we challenge the limitations of frameworks. For example, and I end here. I said that 3 times, okay, that's okay. I ask my students all the time, and I raise a question, and they always say, we have the greatest democracy in the world. I said, let's rewind the tape a minute now. I'm an old school, I used to have the boom box. So let's rewind the tape. Remember when you had to wait for your favorite song to come on the radio and record? So I said, let's rewind the tape a minute. I said, well, you proceed in this conversation as if the democracy exists. The better question is, does a democracy exist, or is it merely an illusion put forth to sustain a particular philosophy and ideology that's willing to have what? A minimum of change and a maximum of static perfection. My students said, who are you again? So critical thought begins to take place when we start challenging the limitations of frameworks. It doesn't operate within the framework. It is challenging the frameworks because why? In order to create a world that is much different than what exists, we have to learn to think of a world in terms of the child and create that world that we potentially think that may exist in the future. All right.
Peace, brothers and sisters. If I may, before I read the poem, A Hymn to the Peoples, out of the book Dark Water, Voices from Within the Veil by W.E.B. Du Bois, and Brandon had related a lot to that wonderful book. I would like to read a paragraph from the introduction by Manning Marable, in that he states Du Bois's critique of whiteness as a social category and its parallels to the souls of black folks. It says, like souls, Dark Water is constructed around a set of essays that at the first reading seem to stand independently from each other. Part autobiography, part poetry, Dark Water takes the reader on a spiritual journey. The objective is twofold: to understand the world of worth and wealth, of beauty and death from the perspective of black folk, and to offer white America a way out of its own racial hatred through the salvation of hope and humanity. In a sense, what Du Bois wants to achieve is the deconstruction of both whiteness as a social category and its hierarchies of oppression. For this to be accomplished, Du Bois contends that white Americans must come to a new understanding and an appreciation of what it means to be black. A hymn to the peoples. O truths of God in primal meeting of the sons of man, foreshadowing the union of the world. From all the ends of earth we come. O night, the elder sister of the day, mother of the dawn in the golden east, meets in the misty twilight with her brood, pale and black, tawny, red and brown, the mighty human rainbow of the world, spanning its wilderness of storm. Softly in sympathy, the sunlight falls. Where's the radiance of the moon? And on the darkest midnight blaze, the stars. The far-flown shadows of whose brilliance drop like a dream on the dim shores of time, forecasting days that are to these as day tonight. So sit we all as one, so gloomed in tale and stone-weathered groves. The Buddha walks with Christ, and our Quran and Bible both behold. Almighty Word, in this time, thine awful sanctuary, first in flame-haunted city, of the widening world. Assaul us, Lord of lands and seas. We are but weak and wayward men, distraught alike with hatred and vainglory, prone to despise the soul that breathes within, high vision hordes that lie and steal and kill, sinning the sin each separate heart disclaims, clamoring upon our riven, withered selves, besieging heaven by trampling men to hell. We be blood guilty, though our hands be red, no one may blame the other in this sin, but here in the white silence of the dawn, before the womb of time, we bow hearts aflame in shame. We face the birth pangs of a world. We hear the stifled cry of nations, all but born. We see the nakedness of toil, the poverty of wealth. We know the anarchy of empire and doleful death of life. And hearing, seeing, knowing all, we cry. Save us, world spirit, from our lesser selves. Grant us that war and hatred cease. Reveal our souls in every race and hue. Help us, O human God, in this thy truce, to make humanity divine.
Okay, not trying to go Hollywood on you now. I can't express to people, I passed out flyers, and being in court for Mumia, or being on the outside, letting this government know that we will not stand by and allow them to keep Mumia in prison. We fought when people said it couldn't happen, got him off of death row. We fought when they said that they would not give Mumia hepatitis C cure. They said it'll never happen. And what's left now, he's getting the hepatitis C cure. We have got to be there in massive numbers. So, you know, with the flyer, I'm asking people to send it out with the urgency. We need people in the streets. And to do for Mumia what Mumia has 36 years in prison in the bowels of the belly of the beast, who damn near killed him several times, and we keep fighting, and we got him on this level. Mumia's birthday is April the 24th. We fight because Mumia lives, and we fight because we want this government to understand a 36-year movement have been toe-to-toe with these mother suckers, and we continue to win. And we must, it's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. We must be in the streets on April the 24th in the morning. It's an all-day event, but in the morning for court, we must be there so that they can understand how we're still standing firmly. There's going to be a demonstration, you know, on the outside. There's going to be a march a little bit later after the court proceedings, and at 6 o'clock at Broad and Arch Street, there's going to be an evening program giving you the legal and the medical update. So I'm going to end it. I'm usually long-winded, but I'm saying, look, Tony, man, you are so awesome. And the school, I just want people to know who don't come whenever I'm in town. And if I don't have a ride, they make sure I get there. But I'm saying you just got to sample today of what goes on every Saturday. So I'm saying, you know, to spark that thought in your mind, to stand up and fight this government and show you that it's nothing new, but it's teaching you how to do it and stand firm. On the move, long live revolution, long live the Black and Brown Collective, long live Saturday Free School, on the move. And Mumia's brother is right here. Keith Cook came all the way up from North.
He's from the Tenderloins too. Am I right? He said that's right. I mentioned to one brother that I was from the Tenderloin. He started cha-cha. Yeah, but I'm gonna turn Keith Cook. You know, Mumia's government name was Wesley Cook. So this is Keith. Just say a couple.
Yeah, I didn't change my name.
Yeah.
I'm Keith. I just want to just parallel with Pam how important it is that everyone comes out they can. We're winning. You know, this has been a good year because we're winning, and because of Mamiya, everybody that has Hep C in Pennsylvania prisons has the opportunity now to get a cure. And that's because of this long 36-year movement that we have, that you all been part of, that we have scared them, we have kept on the phones, we have kept on we have walked, we have marched, we've been to all out in the country. Where's the DOC at? What city was that in? Out by Harrisburg somewhere. We've been in Strand. So we've been everywhere. Just raising Cain. And I get up here when I never know if I'm out, but I get up here when I can. And I'll be here for that day on the 24th to celebrate Mamiya's birthday. So come on out. We're winning, and if we can win on this case, it's coming up now. They're not gonna give the answer to it on the 24th. They'll give an answer to it on another day. But if we can win, that puts Mamiya in court again, and if we can get him in court again, we're getting free. So come out. Thank you very much.
Good evening, friends of Saturday Free School. How you all doing? Always delighted, elated, in fact, to be able to come and share a little bit of music with people that show up and do so much work and so much thoughtful work in terms of just keeping us educated and doing things productive together. Autumn's going to join in a minute and share a song, but I figured I'd warm it up with a little Bob Marley. So, do a redemption song.
Emancipate yourselves from mental slavery.
None but ourselves can free our minds.
Have no fear for atomic energy.
For none of them
Can stop the time. How long must they kill our prophets while we stand aside and love? Some say we're just a part of it. We got to fulfill the book. Won't you help to sing these songs of freedom? It's all I ever had. Redemption songs, these songs of freedom.
Now I'm gonna go back into the first verse.
Oh, pirates, yes, they rob I. Sold out to the merchant ship. Minutes after they took out from the bottomless pit. But my hand was made strong by the hand of the Almighty. As we forward through this generation, triumphantly, won't you help me sing these songs of freedom? All I ever had. Redemption songs.
cool. Well, I'm super nervous, and Nandita reminded me that, well, most of the people here right now are free school people, so it's all in the family here. So if I screw up, tell everybody we did great. So this is a song that is pretty old, and I guess it's appropriate. We're in a church, so because I don't do a lot of church stuff, but this is a really pretty church song that was spun around by Pete Seeger, and it's some people might know it's "How Can I Keep from Singing." Life goes on in endless song above earth's lamentations. I hear the tune, though far away, that hails a new creation. Through it up? Can we go up to a seat? Can we do that? Though the tempest now and over, I hear the truth and singing. What though the darkness gather round, songs in the night she giveth. No storm can shake my inmost sound. While to that rock I'm clinging, since song is heard in the heaven, how can I keep from singing? How can I Thank you. I have a request from him, so. If you guys have a request, he covers the request. There's only one other song I know how to do. May I just stand up? Up
I just feel really overwhelmed by the brilliance of my comrades. We weren't like this when we started, but the fact that we can grow and develop into revolutionary human beings give me a lot of hope for the future, and that we can have a completely different world if we develop ourselves and commit ourselves to humanity. And with the example of Tony Montero.
No, please. Enough of this Tony Montero.
Okay.
Okay, right.
And Pam Africa and all the elders, thank you. Thank you for making us into better people. We love you so much. Thank you.
I was remembering what Susan was saying about displacement. And when I first came to the US, similar, well, not in the same way, but in maybe other ways, there's similar thoughts of, I couldn't find anything here, I felt displaced. And I have to say, if there is any home I found here, it is at the Saturday Free School and all the people I met here.
I said most of my piece earlier. I just want to say Saturday Free School is wonderful. I hate waking up early, but I wake up early to come. It is truly like the conferences we put on as well as the school itself. It feels at times like a transcendent spiritual experience. It's a glimpse of the world as it could be, not as it is. Thank you.
Long live Saturday.
Well, it's the five of us that were assigned by the Free School to organize this conference. And this coming week, we're getting started on the next conference we're organizing, which will be a 3-day conference on James Baldwin. So, but just in terms of this conference, and as everyone has said, you have seen the Free School in its glory. Everyone who spoke, and this was a decision that we made at the suggestion of Nanditha. By the way, we used to call her, when we first heard her name, the black ear, we heard Nanika, the way they say. And so we started calling her Nanika. I guess her ghetto name is Nanika. And she said it was all right to call her Nanika. But, so we're going to have a 3-day conference on Baldwin, James Baldwin. And the Free School, it is like Raju said, it is a really transcendent experience. It is unique to the city and maybe to the country. But the key and the purpose of this is that if the people are to liberate themselves, they must embrace great ideas. They must have a wide scope. And I think, like Kayla said, the university is set up to narrow your vision, to make you think that all you can be is a slave to the powerful. And what the Free School attempts to do is broaden the world for everyone, to make the world realizable and understandable for ordinary people. Just one last thing. We have tried very hard to integrate academics, senior professors from the great universities, I put quotes around great, universities in the city. And it has been very difficult. Even when they come, they are unable to fully appreciate the intellectual work of ordinary people, and even sometimes they come and insult us. We've been insulted by them. And although we step to them too after that. But I think someone raised the moral question, the question of the moral imperative of what you stand for, of what are your values. And the free school is grounded in morality and in love for humanity. So a lot of people say, well, you got all South Asians up here with you. And the thing, they're the people that don't work. I mean, they have this, for the time being. But in a lot of ways, and this is what Skipper said to me, I think after one of our other conferences, I think it was Skipper, that what you see in the free school is the way the vanguard of the struggle in this country is going to look going forward. And I'm so grateful to these young people from South Asia who have joined with the Black liberation struggle and who have committed themselves, to the fight for Black liberation and have not given in to the seduction of whiteness. This is huge because there's a lot of money to be made in that. But again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. If you can, help us clean up everything here.